ممكن في حد يعمل لك ميوت يا فوزية؟
نعم.
في حد ممكن يعمل لك ميوت؟ Everyone, hello everyone, thank you all for joining. I am delighted to welcome Hossam Fahr today. Hossam is an Egyptian writer and translator who lives in New York. He was the chief of the UN Headquarters Interpretation Service. He has published 8 books to date. In 2008, his book, Amina Stories, won the Sawiris Foundation Award for Best Collection of Short Stories. Here in Arab World Books, we featured his book, Tales of the Other, in May 2011. In this light, I would like to mention that this year, Arab World Books celebrates its 25th anniversary. We have been actively promoting culture, diversity, and dialogue for a quarter of a century. This makes us a pioneering culture website in the Arab world. It is true, we have a Facebook page, we have a YouTube channel, but this is minimal compared to the information on our website. Online, you will find a wealth of information on Hossam Fahr and his work. In our Book of the Month archives, there is the file prepared on his book, as well as the discussion between the author and his readers, which took place in May 2011. You will also find a collection of articles and writings and important links in the file compiled this month on Hossam Fahr and his work. Tonight is the 10th episode in our International and Arab Author series. Previous guests were Reem Bassiouni, Sylvia Petter, Hal Al-Badri, Susan Tebergen, D.L. Nelson, Nihat Cerise, Karen Leggett Abu Raya, Samia Mehrez, and Wallace Wild Menotzi. All our episodes can be found on our YouTube channel. I will send the link to that on today's chat if anyone is interested. Egyptian author Mohammed Tawfiq will host and moderate this discussion. Thank you all for participating, and I wish you a great evening.
Bravo.
Thank you, Amani.
أسقف بيقولوا لي ما يوصلش.
Thank you, Amani. Hossam Fahr is one of my favorite authors, and it's a great pleasure to have this conversation with him. Welcome, Hossam. Let's start from the beginning. What motivates you to write? At what point in your life did you decide I'm a writer?
First of all, let me thank you and thank Ms. Amani Amin for organizing this event. It is a great honor and privilege for me to be here with you today. What motivates me to write? It's a very difficult question to answer. Maybe I use it as a free psychotherapy or as a way of silencing the incredible noise inside my head. Maybe because I love to hear and tell stories. Maybe I have a need to bare my soul and get rid of some of the heavy emotional baggage I carry. Maybe in some misguided conceit, I think I have something that is worth sharing with others. Maybe for all the above reasons, and maybe because the printed word outlives its writer. Where did it start? Life has been very generous to me. One of its greatest gifts to me was the grandmother I had, Amina, about whom I wrote the book that won the award. She was an extraordinary woman. Born in 1904 or 1905, I'm not exactly sure. She went to school, she went to college, she ended up becoming a teacher, and she spoke flawless English, and she had a deep knowledge of Arab heritage and Muslim heritage. She could quote the Bible, the Quran, Shakespeare, and Thomas Hardy practically in the same breath. She instilled in me a love for stories and for words. Every night during the summer holidays that I always spent with her, she would tell me a story, and I wake up in the morning, write the story, making only one change, that is, I make myself the protagonist. So one day I become Shatar Hassan, the brave lad Hassan. The following day I become Robin Hood. The third day I become King Arthur. The fourth day I become Sinbad the mariner. And I give it to her. She would read it. point out the grammatical and spelling mistakes, and then tell me that this is wonderful, keep doing it. One day, I showed her one of her stories as I rewrote them, and she said, "This can't go on. I don't want you to write the stories that you heard. I want you to write the stories you want to hear." So I wrote a story, about 5 or 6 lines long. She took it, gave me a big hug, and gave me 5 piastres, which was a small fortune at that time in the 60s, and said, "Whenever you write a new story, as long as it has no spelling mistakes and no grammatical mistakes, I will always pay you 5 piastres for it." And in a short time, I became the richest one of her grandchildren in more ways than one. So this is when the ambition to become a writer was born. However, as we all know, writing is a possessive and jealous mistress. It does not accept partners or like sharing. I didn't have the courage or the commitment to devote my whole life entirely to writing. The great short story writer Yahya Tahir Abdullah insisted that his ID card read in the profession line story writer. And that was all he did, without a care to material comfort or daily expenses. That was something I could never do. So writing became a side activity that I did when my work allowed, or when the urge became irrepressible, or when the weight in my heart became too heavy to carry. So it has given me back something commensurate with what I devoted to it. In that sense, I cannot call myself entirely a writer. I am a part-time writer. So that's how it started.
Well, I mean, I think Naguib Mahfouz was also a part-time writer in that definition, or Taha Hussein.
Mhm.
It's very rare that writers make the decision to be exclusive, to do nothing but fiction writing. It's a fact of life. But let me talk a little bit about the writing experience itself.
Mhm.
Writing can be a solitary vocation. In your latest book, By Chance and by Appointment, you call the act of revelation excruciating. You mention long periods of creative drought. You even describe the apparition of a ghost from the past to help you write Faces from New York. Can you share with us how this writing process works for you?
Yeah, of course. On the face of it, writing is probably one of the most improbable human endeavors. Why would anybody living their life, going about their business, decide to get pen and paper and record their innermost feelings and fears, and recall and look for the skeletons in the closet, so to speak, and bare their soul and venture into the darkest recesses of their soul to write something that on the face of it is not entirely necessary? But it is excruciating, as I said, and agonizing, but it is also irrepressible. So the periods of creative drought, I have come to terms with them because I've discovered that they are a period of accumulating experiences and accumulating feelings and emotions, and they build up towards something. The way it happens with me, I get the outline of a work in my head, and I start thinking about it. I leave it to ferment. I basically spend all my time thinking about it, giving it a chance to flourish and to reach a certain shape. Then I start telling it to my friends orally, changing a small detail here, adding a new nuance there. I always make sure I look at their faces and gauge their reactions until it takes the final form. And this is when the actual writing starts, and it usually comes in the form of a deluge. It's like the dam breaks and I start writing. And I still use pen and paper. I cannot write on a computer. So I let it all out and follow the advice of my mentor, one of my greatest teachers, Salah Jahin, who told me, get it all out, then forget it for a few days. Then come back to it. Come back to it. And he used this very beautiful image with the magnifying glass and pliers of a jeweler and the cleaver of a butcher. Look closely at the gems, pick them up, and all the rest that is not necessary, amputate mercilessly. Art is about addition, not about is about deletion, not about addition. So I will give you an example. The book, The New York Faces, in the first writing, it was about 250 pages. When it was published, it was about 105 pages. So you can imagine how much of it was deleted. So basically, this is what happens. It takes me a long time, and I'm in no rush. I let it take its time. I let it ferment. And eventually, when it comes out, I spend a lot of time editing, doing what my mentor said, the jeweler's work and the butcher's work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
These are short stories. Short stories are more difficult to adapt than a novel.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
And long. And sometimes the author wants to show that he goes with the new wave, or with it creating a new wave, and then becomes more and more difficult to read.
Yeah.
If I may just add another thing, after this long process takes place comes the dreaded moment of publication. I once read in an article in the New Yorker a line that continues to ring in my head from time to time, and it says, the peculiarity of being a writer is that the entire enterprise involves the mortal humiliation of seeing one's own words in print. And I felt it very strongly because whenever something of mine is actually printed and I see it in print, the first thing I see is the mistakes. The first thing I see is, oh, this should not have been here. Oh, this should have been added. Oh, this should have been omitted. But they are no longer mine. I can't do anything about them. I cannot correct them. And there is no way to change that. And those failings and shortcomings become my eternal shame that probably nobody else knows about. But this is the thing that I feel most. So the whole process starts, and then you end up with this mortal humiliation of seeing your words in print.
Okay, I'm going to get back to the writing, the creative writing, but first let me put a question regarding translation and interpretation.
Yes.
You have described the interpreter's booth as a prison cell. On the other hand, you have translated an important historical work by Khalid Fahmy, In the Quest of Justice, Islamic Law and Forensic Medicine in Modern Egypt. Now, please share with us a little bit your relationship with translation. How has it influenced your creative writing? In what way are they similar? In what way do they differ?
Okay, first of all, about the prison cell, I must have been in a really bad mood when I wrote that, because for me, interpretation is a passion. It is, I worked as an interpreter for 25 years, and during which I lived every minute of my life as an interpreter. I was, every word I heard, everything, every word I read, everything I saw, I constantly thought, how would you interpret that? And it's a true passion for me. And for 25 years, I never felt I was going to work. You know, Bernard Shaw once said, happy is the man who makes a living out of his hobby. Interpretation was my hobby, and I really enjoyed doing it. And without too much false modesty, I excelled at it. And the reward for my excellence was to take me away from the thing that I loved and give me an administrative responsibility for 12 years and have to worry about who wants to take days off and who wants to go on holiday and things like that. And it was, you know, I would get those urges and I leave my office and run to the booth and say to my colleagues, please let me interpret for 10 minutes. I need that shot of adrenaline. Now, translation is something different for me, because I had never translated a book before in Quest of Justice, and I'm not likely to repeat the experience. It was a spiritual experience in a way, because when I was reading the book, about halfway through, I fell in love with it. I was so impressed with the effort made by Khaled Fahmy to collect the information and to get all the documents, and it's an amazing piece of work. And somehow I felt it talking to me. I felt it saying to me, I must be read in Arabic and you must translate me. So I got in touch with Khaled Fahmy, who's a dear friend, and I said, you know, congratulations on the great book. I'm really impressed, and if you haven't agreed with anyone to translate it, I would love to do it. And he said, please do. So I went ahead and I did it. But writing on the one hand, translating and interpreting on the other are almost polar opposites. Writing is freedom. Translating and interpreting are servitude. When you're writing, you're your own master. You decide what you want to do, how you want to do it. You can change this, add that, whatever. When you're interpreting or translating, you're serving many masters all at the same time. The original and the target language, the author and the reader, the culture from which you're translating or interpreting, and the culture into which you're translating and interpreting. And you need, and many more. So you need to navigate and negotiate your way among all those masters and try desperately to satisfy them all, or at least to distribute the displeasure equally among them. But in writing, you do not have that. However, how has that affected my writing? Or how has translating and interpreting affected my writing, and how has writing affected my translating and interpreting? They all stem from a love, a veneration for words. And they teach you that every word has a value and every word has a weight, and it is not to be taken lightly. Interpretation in particular is about brevity and precision. If you can say something in one word and say it in 3, it's a crime. If you say it in 5, it's an unforgivable sin. And that has affected my writing and has been reflected very much in my writing. You would find very few words. I think it was our good teacher, Ala Adib, who once described one of my stories as saying that it contained what he described as an incredible economy of words. So this is definitely the effect of interpretation on my writing. In translating the book, I had more freedom to change certain things, to alter certain sentences, things like that, but they all benefited from my wide-ranging readings and my love for words. So they all feed into each other in one way or the other.
But we've been talking about interpretation from the technical point of view, from the world, the point of view of words and terms and expressions and so on. But there's also another aspect, which is the aspect of dealing with divergent ideologies and different points of view. At the UN, you must have experienced that firsthand. Also, living in New York, working at the UN, you must travel in this environment of diversity. Even in your works, your stories, you have expressed a lot of different aspects of this journey. Can you share with us some of the aspects of this cultural diversity, ideological diversity that you have been exposed to all these years?
Let me first of all go back to my grandmother for a minute. My grandmother was the daughter and the product of the 1919 revolution. She was a great patriot. She believed in the leadership of Saad Zalul, and she believed strongly in the deep respect for diversity and difference. The religion belongs to God, the homeland belongs to all, you know, all the slogans of the 1919 revolution. And she instilled that in all her grandchildren. You respect people because they are people. That's it. I went armed with this kind of upbringing into my diverse work environment at the United Nations. And before that, I had the fortune to live with my family in the Soviet Union when my father was the military attaché there. And again, it was very small experiences that taught me that everything is relative, that there is no absolute truth, and what I hold right is not necessarily right by everybody else. So that was another weapon in my arsenal, so to speak, in going to that. I worked in an office that had 125 people from 50 different nationalities, 6 different linguistic groups, innumerable faiths, orientations, and as we say in Arabic, the real treasure is people. معرفة الناس كنوز. And I saw that firsthand. When we were discussing, let's say, the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there was at least 2 people there who had firsthand experience of that situation and who could tell me how to pronounce a name, what map to look at to understand where the location of things are. It was a real treasure. And I had to learn in my daily exchanges with all these people, being a colleague and then being their chief, that we are all the same. We human beings, we the human species are exactly the same. You know, from traveling all over the world and whatever, I have come to the conclusion that we all love in the same way, we fear in the same way, we care for our children in the same way, we want to bequeath them a better world in the same way, and we're just the same. So, of course, living in New York helped with that too, but it has been a very enriching experience in that sense. Again, and then to become an interpreter, your job is to convey the message. Your personal feelings, your personal convictions have to be put aside. You're sitting there hearing words that literally make blood boil in your veins. But it's your duty to convey them exactly as they are. And your voice should not betray your anger or your frustration. Never. So in that sense, it also helped me deal with differences and trying to see where the other person is coming from. One day, after 10 years of being responsible for 150 people, I said, I am so tired of putting myself in somebody else's shoes. Can I wear mine for a few minutes, please? But it is a very enriching experience to put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Let's go back to fiction writing. As you know, I'm a great admirer of your writing. I feel that your language balances simplicity with precision and density. You also grapple with the need to highlight the different languages used by your characters, since often you have characters from different cultures, and but it's not just the Arabic and the English languages, but also the colloquial versions of these two languages. In some cases, you write a whole story in Arabic colloquial. So how do you reconcile the different roots, the different cultural roots in your writing, and what is your relationship with language and with place?
This is a very difficult question to answer because I really do not have a clear-cut, conscious decision on how to do this or that. It comes naturally. So if you read, say, New York Faces, you'll find that the first 5 stories, when the narrator is a newcomer and getting to know his, excuse me, his new hometown, the dialogue is in modern standard Arabic. And then all of a sudden, the narration continues to be in modern standard in the following stories, but the dialogue becomes in Cairene colloquial. So, as in New York has become another Cairo. So I do not really make a conscious decision to use modern standard or colloquial or vernacular or whatever. It just comes naturally. And of course, when the character in the book or in the piece is not even an Arabic speaker or an English speaker, I somehow try to capture some of the local flavor of that person's language, if I know it, and then try to reflect it. But as far as I'm concerned, the content leads and the language follows. That's how I deal with it.
So so we're talking about content and language. We know that generally you prefer short stories and novellas, short, compact pieces. Was this a conscious decision?
Yes and no. By inclination, I like the shorter things. I started with poetry when in my teens, I started to write poetry, and very quickly realized that poetry, Arabic poetry with its meter and rhyme scheme and everything, is rigorous and difficult, and that I didn't have enough talent to do that and to continue writing poetry. But to me, poetry is the essence of all beautiful art. I mean, you can look at a painting and see a poem. You could read a story and see a poem. And to my mind, the short story was the short story as I define it, was the closest thing to the spirit of poetry. Short story, as I define it, is not a summarized novel, is not something that takes place in 10 pages instead of 200. It's a moment, a fraught, charged moment that carries more than meets the eye at first glance. What it doesn't say is more important than what it states, and it should pack a punch. and the punch comes usually in what they call the moment of illumination. The literary critics call it, which is like the last two lines. I mean, I remember very clearly a story by Yusuf Idris that shook me to the core. It was about a little boy who wanted a few piastres from his father to go to the movies, and his father kept prevaricating and saying tomorrow, the day after, inshallah, whatever. And the boy decides one night he's going to take things into his own hands. He's going to go into his father's room and take the money from his wallet. He opens the wallet and he sees his father. A second-class bus ticket, few coins, a faded picture of his mother, things like that. And it becomes a rite of passage, a moment of coming of age for him. He no longer wanted the 5 piastres to go to the movies. He closed the wallet, and as he walked out, he saw his little brother who was sleeping on the couch. The blanket had fallen off, so he just covers his brother. In a way, he becomes the father again. That's the essence of poetry. And it's a beautiful story, and it's very poetic. So that's why I decided I would go for, not decided, but I found myself going for the short story instead of the novel. And even I wrote a novella and a novel. When you look at them, they are actually a group of short stories that are written or compiled together to create the novella or the novel. They are written in the same logic of a short story.
Recently, Annie Ernaux won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and her work has been described as rooted in the area between fiction, memoir, and autobiography.
Yes.
To what extent does that description apply to your own writing?
I think that some of my writings fall squarely into that definition. In particular, New York Faces, Amina's Stories, and By Chance and By Appointment. The first 2 books were complete fiction. And then the novella and the novel were also complete fiction, but there are at least 3 books that fall squarely into that definition. Which in a way is a good thing, and I think it is gaining more and more ground now. More people are doing, I don't know what it's called exactly. There is a term in literary criticism, but it's like you look in the mirror and there is you outside the mirror, you in the mirror, and then there is the third person who comes out of the two. So it is not exactly autobiographical, it is not exactly fictional, it's somewhere in between. So.
Okay. Of course, you received the prestigious Sawiris Award for your book, Amina Stories. Now, what are your thoughts on literary awards in general? Do they help in promoting good writing? How do they impact a writer's career? How did they impact your career?
Okay, in my case, the way I won the award was in itself a great award and a great prize. Dr. Galal Amin, may he rest in peace, read the book, he liked it, and he knew my mother somehow, so he called her and he asked for a copy of my ID card. And she said, why? I said, I'll tell you later. And then, so she sent it to him. He went and bought a number of copies, nominated the book, gave them my ID card, and then told my mother that the book has been nominated. Don't tell Hossam, I don't want him to be disappointed. So one day I get a call when I was in New York, somebody saying, congratulations, you won the Sawiris Award. And I said, I had no idea it was nominated. Who nominated it? Whatever. And said, we don't know. Just come and pick it up. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I'm in New York, I can't come. So my mother would pick it up on my behalf. So it was a great experience. It is something that I mean, I will always be grateful to Dr. Galal Amin for that, and I'm in his debt forever. But it hasn't really impacted my writing. I don't write with an eye to anything but writing itself. Writing is its own prize. If I write something that I am reasonably proud of, or at least not terribly ashamed of, that's my award. That's my prize. Like any human endeavor, literary awards have their positive sides and their negative sides. One of the negative sides that I have seen recently, particularly with the plethora of very highly paying awards in Gulf countries and things like that, is what I call an unbecoming and an inelegant lobbying. You find these campaigns on social media for a certain novel or a certain writer and whatever, and it's so transparent, so see-through. You know that this is putting pressure on the committee that is selecting the winning book, and it is, just as I said, it's inelegant and unbecoming. There is also too much acrimony and recriminations and charges of bias and oh, it's because they are from that nationality or from the other nationality. Things that have nothing to do with the simple fact that it is a personal taste of 5 people sitting there reading some books, and it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It is a simple fact that tastes are different, and as they say in French, you cannot discuss tastes or colors. But on the positive side, because many, well, the majority of us writers cannot make a living out of our writing, a financial reward makes life a little easier for some people and makes them breathe easier and have more time to write. And of course, it's motivating. Any recognition is motivating by nature. So the recognition, the literary recognition is important, the financial reward is important, but as long as it does not push people into that corner of, you know, recriminations and seeing conspiracy against them and things like that. That's all I can say about it. But for me, as I said at the beginning, writing is its own prize.
That's probably the advantage of having a day job, not
Absolutely.
depending exclusively on writing. Now,
Absolutely.
you mentioned Salah Jahin and Yusuf Idris. Who else are the writers that have inspired you, and what type of writing do you enjoy to read?
Well, I don't think we have enough time to give you the list of all the writers I like, and I basically, thanks to chronic insomnia, I am an avid or even manic reader. I read for very, very long hours every day. I've learned a great deal from a lot of writers. I've learned from a lot of writers what I should aspire to and try to emulate. And I also learned from other writers what I should avoid and never try to replicate. But of course, well, I mean, I have a passion for Arabic literature in general. Short story writers have a special place in my heart, you know, starting from Yahya Haqqi to Yusuf Idris to Yahya Tahir Abdullah to Muhammad al-Busati to Muhammad al-Makhzangi, who's a great writer. I have a passion for Russian classics and also for Latin American literature. I love poetry. I scarcely a day goes by without me reading a poem or two in various languages. So, you know, I really have a lot of names. I recently started discovering Chinese literature, which is amazingly beautiful. In English, I I love Steinbeck, Hemingway, Salman Rushdie, V.S. Naipaul, and I'm not talking about 1984 or Animal Farm or whatever. I love George Orwell's style of stripping the language to its bare bones, which is most evident in his great small book, Homage to Catalonia. I read it and reread it just to see how he literally strips the language down to its bare bones and says a very wide meaning in very few words. It's an amazing skill. I can go on and on and on, but I think that's enough.
Okay, we'll be opening up the floor for the participants. But first, let me ask you a final question. It's a general question. What are the universal issues you're concerned with? What are the issues of our time? Where's the world heading?
Well, the major issue that I'm concerned with, which has been brewing for a number of years, but has come to a head during the COVID-19 pandemic, is that the old order has collapsed, but nobody knows what the new order is. We don't know what is going to replace it. So we are unfortunately living the Chinese curse of may you live in interesting times. We are living in a very interesting time of uncertainty. We know what is not working, but we don't know what is going to come in its place. There are other issues that really concern me, like climate change. What kind of world are we bequeathing to our children and our grandchildren? When you talk about climate change, you cannot separate that from the unsustainable patterns of consumption and production, the need to revisit everything we do in life in order to try to preserve life on this very small, precious planet of ours. I was reading the other day something that really struck me. It was about raising cattle in the United States. It says it takes 7 kilos of grains to produce 1 kilo of meat. And the 7 kilos of grains require 1,000 liters of water to grow. So when we buy a kilo of meat, we're buying 1,000 liters of water. How many thousand liters of water are on this planet? So all these things worry me and weigh heavily on my mind. But at the same time, I see that there is a younger generation that is in full control of the tools of its world and of the tools of its time. And they say it loud and clear, we don't need your wisdom. We know our world better than you do. And I think when they take things in their own hands, the world will be a better place. I once wrote in something I had started in English but never finished, one of the characters was saying, I do not dare commit the sin of hope. I fear that will not go unpunished. But I continue to commit the sin of hope all the time. And I never give up. So yes, there are very big, frightening issues, but there are also many bright lights, I think.
Well, I think we've covered good ground, but of course we haven't covered anything, which is a good point to open up the floor. Who would like to make comments or ask questions? Yusuf Wahsh, please.
Well, good evening. I'm wearing all my clothes because it's cold where I live here in 6th of October. So I'd like to thank you, Mr. Hassan and Mr. Muhammad, Mrs. Amani, for this lovely presentation and discussion. I enjoyed it and learned from it a lot. I have a comment and a question, if I may. Comment that you mentioned that when you finish work, you find mistakes in it, and you are not satisfied fully with what you did. And I can tell you that all creative people, musicians, painters, and writers, they have the same feeling. Even sportsmen. I play swimming in master's team of one of the clubs, and after every competition, I find that I did mistakes. I think the same thing is shared with football players and with other sportsmen. My question for you is that you mentioned the influence of your grandfather on your writing and your creativity and raising you in this line, but you did not mention your parents at all. And so where your parents were in this, did they encourage you, they discourage you, what they did, yani, father and mother? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the comment. Just to reinforce your point, I always remember a letter from Al-Qadi al-Fadl to Al-Imad al-Asfahani, in which he says to them, and whenever somebody writes a book and takes a second look at it, they say, if this was added, that would be better. If this was omitted, the book would be clearer, whatever. And this is a great lesson in the deficiency of human endeavor. So that is something that has been with all writers forever. The question about it was my grandmother, not my grandfather. My parents were very much there. My parents were very supportive. My parents provided me with all the books I needed, with all the chances to read what I wanted to read. They always took me and my brother to museums, to music halls. They played a great supporting role. I mentioned my grandmother because she was the one who sowed the seed of the writing and of the love of words in my mind. Her influence on my life was so strong that she actually named my son after her death. Because when I was 6 years old or 7 years old, I used to read the Quran with her, and she would make sure I pronounced the words correctly and everything. And one day I told her that I loved Surah Yusuf. And she said, God grant that you have a boy and call him Yusuf. She died 2 years before my son was born. And of course, he was called Yusuf. So you can imagine the influence she had on my life.
Of course. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Muhammad Idris.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone on this distinguished platform. My thanks and appreciation indeed to my dear friend, Ambassador Mohammed Tawfiq, and his dear wife, Dr. Amani, for establishing this platform and sustaining its diverse activities over 25 years. This is a remarkable job. Thank you very much. I'm equally honored to be with my dear friend, talented and refined personality, our guest this evening, Hossam Fahr, whom I came to know and admire his talent before meeting him, and became one of his fans as I followed firsthand the successful path he pursued as a UN professional staff and as a creative writer. Interestingly enough, I read his book, New York Faces, which was like an artistic eye-opener for me before going to New York to start my post there first time as a member of our diplomatic mission there. Then during my last post there in New York, I attended his farewell, retiring his job in the UN, and witnessed how much love and recognition he enjoyed. I also consider myself among the luckiest this evening for many reasons. One of them, that I have a first-hand acquaintance with Hossam, and also that I hold now in my hand one of his excellent books, Hikayat Amina, with a personal dedication from Hossam, saying, As-Sadiq al-Aziz Muhammad Idris, mahabbatan wa taqdiran, what a great pleasure and honor indeed, dear Hossam. In Hossam's writings, you have a real dive into the wondrous deep layers of what you habitually see on the surface of your everyday life. A smooth navigation into complex emotional horizons, a decent intertwining between the personal existential worries, the public domain concerns, and the ultimate human cause. The examples are many in his books, Amina, New York Faces, and others. Sorry if I took some time for personal reasons, but however, allow me to raise and seek the opinion of Hossam about a point he raised on the dimensions of the portrait of the story writer or the novelist. We have examples of monolithic personalities, those who couldn't partner with and combine more than one demanding life, a successful, disciplined professional career, and the ability to pursue the adventurous, moody, rebellious life of an artist. Some had to give up one for the sake of the other, and as I mentioned, Yahya Abdullah, we have Yahya Haki, we have many others, and however, others could have a multidimensional path of life. Of course, as they say always at the UN, no one size fits all. So, Mayor Hossam, in this illuminating meeting, you can shed some light on how you did choose your fitting size and how did you opt for your way forward. Do you think that was the right choice? As Mr. Mohammed Tawfiq mentioned, many writers have other jobs to do, but also some had jobs in the shadow. But in the case of Hossam, and also in the case of Mr. Mohammed Tawfiq, you don't have side jobs on the shadow, but you had a very demanding and very jobs on the spot. So combining both, you think that was out of necessity or out of choice? The other point and last one about the trends, Hossam, in the short stories and in the novels. Of course, this does not follow a linear path. But if we talk about new trends, what do you see now as new trends? And what do you foresee that this line will go forward in the future and in the time ahead? Just as a futuristic view, what will be the path and the way forward in this domain of novels and of story writing? Thank you very much.
May I answer?
Yes, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank Ambassador Mohammed Idris, a dear friend, for his very kind words. And I remember clearly how honored I was with him attending my retirement party at the UN, and the great speech he made and showered me with praise that I think was a little more than I deserved. Now, the first question was about the two lines that ran parallel in my life. In the last year and a bit of my work at the UN, I was chief of the Interpretation Service, and I was also acting director of something called the Meetings and Publishing Division, known for short as MPD. And the day I was told I was going to have this additional responsibility, I said, hallelujah, somebody has finally admitted that I am the director of the multiple personality disorder. Throughout my whole professional life and my writing life, I was a divided man. In my professional life, I had to dress a certain way, talk a certain way, act a certain way. And in my writing life, I was another man completely. And it was, I somehow managed to separate the two men for most of the time. Sometimes one of them would interfere in the life of the other and mess it up completely. But luckily that didn't last for very long. But especially when the writer interfered in the life of the international civil servant, it was not easy. It was not easy. And there were many times when I had to apologize to people profusely for quick temper or for refusing to talk or something like that, because that the other guy was there, not me. As for the trends of the storytelling, whether in the form of a short story or a novel, the 80s and the 90s were a very sad period in the writing domain in Egypt. There was this thing called Al-Hassasiyya Al-Jadida, which basically meant that if you said anything that was easily understood or that was not too esoteric or does not extremely difficult language or whatever, then you're falling in the trap of sentimentality and it is not real literature. Luckily, this phase has come and gone. Now there is a recognition that to tell a story, you have to tell a story. It has to be entertaining. It has to capture the attention of the reading. You're not there to flex your linguistic muscles. You're not there to show them how much more you know. You're there first to tell them a story. And maybe in that story, there is something underneath, something deeper, as you said, that deals with the dilemmas of the human life in more than just the story itself. And I hope that continues, because the most precious thing we have is time. And now as writers, we are competing for whatever is left of people's time after their work and their social media and their cell phones and the cinema and the movies and whatever. So when somebody decides generously to give you 15, 20 minutes of his time to read something you wrote, it might as well be worth it and might be entertaining, informative, and easily accessible. And I think that trend is going to continue, or at least I hope so.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Amira? Can you please unmute? No.
Okay, so first of all, I was amazed by the story of your grandmother, Amina. And I have more than one reason for that. I had a great grandmother. Her name also was Amina. And she was an amazing woman. She perplexes me. I've seen her, but she died when I was 5 years old. And the reason she perplexes me, although I have not lived with her for a long time, is that her daughters and her granddaughters tell us very strange things about her. They all tell me that she was a very good swimmer, professionally. I mean, she swam as we learned to swim in swimming schools. She was very independent, although she was a traditional wife and pious Muslim. She was an avid reader. And I've always wondered, she seemed even more progressive than even her own daughters. And I've always linked it as well to the 1919 revolution. And I actually wrote a note on it to myself. I published it on Facebook, posted it on Facebook, I would say. I called it رحلة البحث عن أمينة. So I was looking for someone I hardly knew, but I could sense her blood running in my veins. So jumping from that, I loved how she told you to write a story every day where you are the protagonist. And I would think that was very sound advice. Because that made you write every day. You have the discipline of writing on a daily basis. So my question is, what advice do you have for aspired writers, especially people like us who, like me, who have started coming to writing a little bit late? What can one do on a daily basis from your point of view that can help with writing? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Like your great-grandmother, my grandmother is more progressive and probably more open-minded than her great-granddaughters or granddaughters, for sure. My mother's generation was still as progressive as her, but you know, it's in the nature of things, in the nature of the wave that has overtaken our society. So I don't think this is going to last, but that's besides the point. I'm not one for giving advice. I always say that unsolicited advice is a form of criticism. So I don't like giving or receiving advice. But the only thing I have found that is indispensable for a writer is reading. Reading and reading and reading. High literature, subway literature, magazines, newspapers, Facebook posts. Reading is the most important thing, because it is in reading that we find the seeds of the ideas that will blossom in our heads and develop into something written. And then, if possible, write 5 lines a day, even if they don't mean anything. Even if they are just hallucinations. Just 5 lines. Keep that hand going. But in my case, I spend months without writing a word. But I cannot spend a day without reading. I think that's the only thing I can say.
Ali Hassan. The sound is not coming through.
No, something is wrong.
No, there's no sound.
Hello? Hello? Now it's okay?
Now it's okay. Now it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. مساء الخير. Good afternoon for everyone. It's nice to me to join with this group. I am a website geologist and writer. I have 2 questions for Mr. Hossam. The first one, as my career is all the time is affecting my view and my life. For Mr. Hossam, just I need to ask him, once when you started to write down in English for books, exactly last time I was reading about
I'm sorry, I can't hear you at
to
all.
write in English. I need to ask him you for or for Arabic people or Arabic culture, or for everyone, when you start the effects on your writing. So, especially in short stories, find your career is affected exactly in when you start to write or this. Hello?
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you at all.
Yeah, the connection isn't very good. Can you repeat slowly your point, your question?
Or if possible, can it be written in the chat?
Yeah. Mr. Ali, can you write your question in the chat, because the internet connection, your voice is breaking.
Yes, exactly. I lost the connections now, but it's come back again. So
Okay, go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Go ahead.
yeah, my questions are 2 questions. Once when you write down or start down in English, Mr. Hossam, exactly I need to ask you, when you write down now in English language, not in Arabic, you think in Arabic people or Egyptian people or Arabic cultures or for everyone. Especially, it's so difficult for me when I started to write in English to keep myself away from my mother language. I have to think first in English or in French and explain for everything inside my brain to
Again, the connection is failing.
Are you
The connection is failing.
Well, the connection is fading, but the question is I think the question I think is clear. The question relates to.
Okay.
Okay. The second
Thank you.
question, can you go ahead with the second question? We got the first question.
Second question, for your career or your job, what effects on your writings? For example, when you start to write down short stories, you find or what you like to write, or you keep yourself away from your career?
Okay. Have you got the questions?
I mean, if I understood them correctly, because the sound was breaking, but the first one about if I'm writing in English, am I thinking of the Arab readers or the Arab culture or whatever? When I'm writing, be it in Arabic or in English, I do not have a target audience in mind. I'm writing because I have something I want to say. If somebody wants to read it, so much the better. If somebody likes it, so much the better. But it's for me first. So I don't have a reader in mind when I write. The second question, I think I had already answered. It is the effect of my profession on my writing. Yes, my profession as an interpreter has taught me to use the fewest number of words possible to cover the widest meaning possible. And I like that, and this is becoming one of the games I play with myself when I write. Is like, you know, I read a sentence after I finish the writing and the rewriting and everything. I start reading it out loud to myself and see if one word can be changed and used another synonym in its place. Then I just delete it. That's it. It's not necessary. If another word can replace it, then it's not necessary. So, yes, my profession has profoundly affected my writing.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Sumaya?
It's a great pleasure that we meet you tonight. I have two questions, but I think they are related together. My voice is clear?
Yes, please go ahead.
If you want to read an Arabic book, which one would you read now for nowadays, not from the previous authors? And do you think that at our Arabian library we discussed all the subjects, or we have a missing subjects, or the way that we write in? Thank you.
Well, there are
Two very good questions. Yeah.
Very good questions and very difficult questions. I was once asked if I was to go on a desert island and allowed only 5 books, which ones would I have with me? And I said, you know, that Alf Layla wa Layla for sure, Malhamat al-Harafish by Naguib Mahfouz for sure, Layali Alf Layla by Naguib Mahfouz for sure. And then I said, no, I can't only have 5 books, you know, you have to give me more. I really cannot say which one book I would want to read right now. I have read some excellent books recently. I've read Muhammad Tawfiq's Zahra min Hajar, and I fell in love with it. I've read two fantastic novels by two young ladies whom one I had the pleasure of meeting, the other one I haven't met yet. One is Victoria by Caroline Kamel, the other one is هناك حيث ينتهي النهر by Maryam Abdelaziz, which is a masterpiece. I've been reading a lot of very good books recently, and Abjad is very helpful. It has opened a whole new world to me. I've discovered some Omani writers, particularly the lady Bushra Khalfan. I read two magnificent pieces of work by her. So there are plenty of books. As for have we covered all subjects, I don't think anybody in the world has covered all subjects. And there is always room for more books to read and more books to write. The biggest issue for me in particular, and I feel it acutely because I write in two languages. In Arabic, the inner censor inside my head is much stronger and much more present than when I write in English. I'm freer when I write in English. I am not afraid to deal with certain subjects or to use certain words and things like that. And maybe that's a limitation that is somehow narrowing the possibility of writing more books in Arabic, but there is no such thing as the Arabic library that has all books or not. I think that's not a realistic thing to look for.
Thank you for that. We have still about 10 more minutes. Any more comments or questions? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this. I have so enjoyed it. I only wish Farouk could be with us, but he left us just before the era of Zoom, and he couldn't know. I have the eternal language teacher's question, even though I've retired. So, and ask Awi. Since we were talking about the future, I wonder if Ustaz Hossam has any thoughts about Arabic and its uses in writing. Do you think that you mentioned moving back and forth between Fusha and Amia, طبقاً the needs of what you're writing? Do you see a direction in this? Do you think that should we في الخارج still be teaching our students mainly Fusha? If for the students who are interested mainly in the modern world and are not religious specialists, if you have any thoughts on this.
It's a very thorny issue. It has been with us for decades, if not centuries. My wife is a language teacher. She's the coordinator of the Arabic language program at New York University, and they are faced with this question every single day. Is it the modern standard Arabic or the colloquial? If it's the colloquial, then which colloquial? Is it Egyptian, Levantine, Palestinian, Iraqi, Saudi? Which one? And on what basis do we choose? And of course, there are a great deal of sensitivities between different dialects and different parts of the Arab world. Everybody saying that ours is the best Arabic. So modern standard Arabic is the one thing that unifies us, the one thing that we can all agree on to a certain extent. But colloquial is here to stay, and it's not going to go away. And students need to know modern standard in order to be able to communicate in different parts of the Arab world. That if they choose to study a certain vernacular or a certain colloquial of a certain dialect, then by all means, because the two are not in competition with each other. The two are not mutually exclusive. They add to each other. And now, when you watch some of the TV programs that are on Arabic satellite channels, you will see that in the same program, there is somebody speaking in a Kuwaiti dialect, or somebody speaking in an Egyptian dialect, in the Syrian dialect, and they all understand each other. They all understand each other because they elevate their dialect to something akin to the modern standards, but not exactly the same. But I mean, again, this is just I'm going out on a limb here, but that's what I feel in my heart. But I think this needs a lot more study and a longer period to discuss.
I was thinking particularly about writing. Do you feel as if there's more and more of the Amia appearing in writing?
Yes, plenty more. I mean, I for one, in my latest book, I have 3 stories that are written fully in Amia, but I qualify it as Cairean Amia, because I mean, I don't even say Amia Masriya, because there is no such thing, because the Amia of Cairo is not the same as the Amia of Port Said, it's not as the Amia of Aswan. So yes, there is a tendency to use more, and some people hate it and think this is sacrilege, and others think that it's a natural progression, a natural evolution. So only time will tell.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, until someone comes up with something they want to say, let me take the opportunity to ask one question, or actually 2 questions that came up in the discussion. The first one relates to self-censorship, which you mentioned, self-censorship in one's writing. Of course, you mentioned that you're a reader of course, Naguib Mahfouz, Salman Rushdie, and both of them were stabbed because of their writing. And so self-censorship is certainly a real issue. How constraining do you feel that self-censorship is how constraining it is for you and for your writing?
It is there. I have to fight it. Sometimes I say, no, I shouldn't write this. This is too much. But then the rebel in me says, shut up, leave me alone. I will do what I want. As I was saying to you, the difference between writing and translating. Writing is freedom and translating is servitude. I don't want my writing to become subject to the dictates of the self-censor that is inside my head. But it does constrain me for sure. And it does take a lot of time and effort and energy to convince myself not to fall into that trap. So, but it is a constraint for sure.
So going back to the question, I think Sumaya it was who raised it. Which areas are more affected by self-censorship if we look at the map of Arab writing? In which way is it evident that self-censorship is affecting the final outcome?
First and foremost is science. You cannot read a book about, let's say, evolution without the writer, basically walking on eggshells and saying, we have to always bear in mind this and that and whatever, so science by definition requires complete freedom, and separating it from the taboo. So clearly in science, clearly in current affairs, we have a shameful dearth of books on current affairs, because you can't talk about politics, you can't talk about the economy, you can't talk about this. So what current affairs are you going to write about? and of course in literature. If you cannot, if people cannot separate the writer from the character, and if I write about somebody who is gay, or somebody who is anti-religious, or an atheist, or whatever, and then it becomes a charge that is directed at me personally. That, of course, would stop you from dealing with certain characters or with certain aspects of life. So if you cannot talk about politics, and you cannot talk about religion, and you cannot talk about sex, and you cannot talk about sexual orientation, then how many other things are left? Yeah. And if you cannot talk about the oppression of women, for instance, because all of a sudden it will become a religious discourse, and is it qawama, is it, so things are very confining and limiting and somewhat suffocating because of that constant censorship that we exercise on ourselves as writers, and then that is exercised on us by the wider readership and the society at large.
Somewhat suffocating. Very interesting. Muhammad Idris.
Thank you very much, Brother Mohammed, and you invited us for more questions, so thank you for giving me the floor again. Thank you. Hossam, I want to ask you about when you embark on this journey of writing a story or a novel, are you embarking on an uncharted territory, meaning that you start but you don't have a clear roadmap where it's going to end? What are the way in between the beginning and the end, or you have like a complete plan in your mind, and before you put it on paper and on writing? So how far the journey evolves itself, and how far it is a predetermined direction? Thank you.
It really varies from one thing to the other. Sometimes I have a complete picture in my head of what it is I'm going to write, particularly if it's a short story. How it's going to start, how it's going to end, and where is the moment of tension going to be more evident, and things like that. And then once I start writing it, sometimes it comes exactly as it is in my head. Some other times it just goes its own way. It acquires its own life and goes in its own direction. And so there is no hard and fast rule. Both things happen at times, and I don't have an explanation or a reason why it happens that way.
So is it related to the content, or related to your own psychological and mental drive when you are embarking on writing?
I think it's all of those things and many more.
Yeah,
it's the mood, it's the state of mind, it's the content itself, it's the censor that imposes itself on me. And as I said earlier, I always tell my stories to my friends before I actually write them. And maybe it's just the way I look at them and see their reaction to something I said or whatever that makes me, okay, maybe I should reconsider this. And when I reconsider this, it becomes like a domino effect, and it changes another thing, and that changes a third thing, and then all of a sudden I end up with something that I didn't think of at all.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it seems that we have finished our thoughts just on time. Thank you, Hossam Fahr, for this conversation. Thank you all. This has been a very illuminating and enjoyable evening. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you all in our next conversation.
Thank you
Good
very
night.
much for having me. Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed being here, and I will definitely be with you in your next meetings. Thank you again. Good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you very